Good morning and welcome to Dorset Council's Licensing Subcommittee that we have this morning. My name is Councillor Emma Parker and I'm Chairman of Licensing for Dorset Council. I do need a proposer and a seconder for a chairman for this subcommittee this morning. Do I have a proposer?
May I propose Councillor Emma Parker? Thank you.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Thank you. I will now get my fellow councillors to introduce themselves.
My name's
I'm David Morgan and I represent Wimborne.
Thank you, councillors. And I will now go on to our democratic service officers that we have here today. If you could introduce yourselves, please. Thank you. And our legal representative?
I'm Laura Autry. Sorry, excuse me. I'm Laura Autry, legal advisor to the subcommittee.
Thank you. And I will now go on to our licensing officers.
Rory Keepax, Senior Licensing Officer and author of the report.
Catherine Miller, Senior Licensing Officer.
Thank you. And I will now move on to our applicants. If you would like to introduce yourselves, please.
Good morning. My name's Charles Holland and I am counsel for the applicant.
Hi, good morning. My name's Chris Truscott and I'm the franchisee that will be operating the restaurant for McDonald's.
Good morning. I'm Kirsty Hughes. I'm from Hughes Smith Solicitors.
I beg your pardon. Could you just do that one more time, please?
Kirsty Hughes, Hughes Smiths. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two parties that have registered their interest to make a representation this morning. So if I could get, just check that I've got you both here. Mr. Matthews?
Good morning. Yes, Jerry Matthews, Heatherley Road.
Thank you. And we've got Councillor Gray.
You'll have to move down.
Pardon?
You'll have to move.
That's all good. Okay, thank you. All introductions done. I will now move on to our report author, which I believe is Roy, and this is to give us an outline for the late night refreshment for McDonald's for every day from 2300 hours to 0500 hours. Thank you, Roy.
Yep, thank you, Chair. This hearing is to consider a new premises licence application for McDonald's 2 Suter Way in Weymouth. The applicant has applied for the following activity and times as shown within the application at Appendix 1. And this is late night refreshment indoors, Monday to Sunday, 2300 to 0500. Just an explanation of obviously what late night refreshment is. Hot food and drink is a licensable activity between the hours of 2300 and 0500, hence why they've applied for that. We received 23 representations in total, which you will find these at Appendix 4 of the report. And there were no representations received from any of the responsible authorities, and you'll find the list of the responsible authorities at 3.1 of the report. Just to note that some of the representations that were received mention the types of needs of this premises business, especially in relation to the fact that there already is a 24-hour McDonald's in Weymouth. This can't be considered as part of it. Obviously, that would have been part of the planning application, which was granted. And another reason is that each applicant must be treated on its own merits. Obviously, another thing to note, obviously mentioning planning, this is a licensing committee, not a planning committee, so that we can only discuss the licensing side of things. I would like to remind the members that the options available to them are to grant the licence subject to such conditions as the authority considers appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives and the mandatory conditions, to modify from the scope of the licence any of the licensable activities, or in this case activity, to which the application relates, or to reject the application. And that's all.
Thank you. I will just clarify with councillors that you have no declarations of interest in this application.
No, Chairman, no declaration of interest, no.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for outlining, Roy, that obviously, yes, this is not a planning application. Planning has already been considered. This is for the late night refreshment for 2300 hours to 0500 hours. Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions for our licensing officers?
No, thank you, Chairman.
No.
Thank you. I will now go to the applicant. Do you have any questions directly for our licensing officers?
No, Chair.
I'll now move on to those that have made representation. Do you have any questions at this time for our licensing officer on the report?
Not at this moment, no.
Okay, thank you. I have no questions, thank you. I will now move on to the applicant. Obviously, we have read the report that is in front of us, and obviously I hope that everybody else has read the report. So if you would like to give us an outline or anything that you would like to put into addition to that report, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as you're aware, this is an application for a premises licence in respect of McDonald's at 2 Suter Way, Weymouth. That is a site on a new retail park at Weymouth Gateway. The premises are currently under construction, and we anticipate that they will open on the 18th of May 2022. Although this application is made by McDonald's Restaurants Limited, the premises will be operated by a franchisee, and that franchisee is called Lewco, L-E-W-C-O, Lewco Holdings Limited, and its director and shareholder is Mr. Truscott, who sits next to me. Of course, this isn't a planning hearing, and the premises, or rather the whole development, received planning permission from the local planning authority on the 29th of September 2021. I am, however, going to ask you to look at some of the planning documents. Case law says that whilst you're not bound to follow a planning decision maker's conclusion, you will and should have regard to it when making decisions in the same context. And what I got my instructing solicitors to do was a couple of days ago to lodge with the licensing authority a short bundle of planning documents. I don't know if you have got that. I don't know if Mr. Matthews and Councillor Gray have seen it, because it doesn't appear to have found its way onto the council's website. Right, marvellous.
If you want me to confirm, yes, an email was sent out to the council's director, and sent a direct email to all representations, and it was sent to Democratics to supply a second.
Well, that's fantastic. Could I ask you to have a look, please, at the plan, the proposed site plan, which is page 15 of the short extra bundle, just to get a picture of the entirety of the development we're talking about here. You can see, or should be able to see, that there is effectively the planning permission concerns a retail park abutted by Mercery Road to the west and Suter Way to the north, and it's quite small, but at the top, the most northerly unit is Unit 8, and that is the McDonald's unit that we're talking about. To the south of that, there is Unit 7. That, as I understand, is going to be a Costa Coffee. The parking spaces by Unit 8 and Unit 7 are called on the plan 24-hour parking spaces. And then to the south of the site, and effectively adjoining or the nearest residential user, we've got Units 2, 3, and 4, and they are essentially the large big box retail units that planning permission was granted for. This application, Chair, as you're aware, relates to late night refreshments. There's no alcohol sold at the premises. There's no regulated entertainment provided at the premises. So you're only concerned with late night refreshment, and therefore you're only concerned with the hours of 12 p.m. in the evening till 5 a.m. The following morning. As the report's already said, there's been no representation from any of the responsible authorities in relation to this application, and the only representations you have are from local residents and from 2 ward councillors. And essentially, if I can be so bold as to try and put the issues raised in categories, there really appear to be 3 main issues that are raised by the representors. The first is noise, be that noise from vehicles, people on the premises. The second is antisocial behaviour, and in particular, a theme of the representation seems to be boy racers, if I can use that tag. And the third is litter. There are other issues, and I will deal with those in closing. And in relation to the other issues, I'm largely going to be saying that those issues, things like odours, traffic, and the like, are planning issues, not licensing issues. But the 3 that relate to the licensing objectives are potential noise, potential antisocial behaviour, and the potential for litter. And what I'm going to do at this stage is ask Mr. Truscott if he can give you a little bit of detail about how he, or his company, as the people who will be operating these premises, are going to do what they can in relation to promoting the licensing objectives under those heads. So we'll do a Q&A, and hopefully I'm loud enough to catch the mic, even though it's not pointing at me. But firstly, Mr. Truscott, could you just tell the committee a little bit about your background, please?
Yeah, certainly. So I became a franchisee for McDonald's almost 5 years ago. My background is working, running business teams and sales teams for large global and international brands. I decided probably about 6 years ago that I wanted to operate my own business. And one of the main facets of that was actually to help support predominantly younger people get a start in their careers. So to cut a long story short, that brought me to McDonald's. I decided I wanted to be a franchisee. I purchased the restaurant in Weymouth St Mary Street, the town centre restaurant, in 2017, the summer of 2017, and then purchased the restaurant at Jubilee Retail Park a year after that, at the end of July 2020. I then operated those restaurants for a couple of years, and then just over 2 years ago purchased the restaurant just up the road in Dorchester, adjacent to the Monkey's Jump roundabout. I'm very hands-on involved in my business, so currently I employ over 300 people. With the opening of this restaurant, that will take us to over 400 employees from within Weymouth and Dorchester, so we're a significant local employer. The demographics and of my employees range from age 16 to 80 years old, so we're representative of the local community. I'm involved with lots of local businesses. So I chair Weymouth Bid, We Are Weymouth. and have done so for the last 2 years. I became a board director for them about 3.5, 4 years ago. And part of the reason for that was because I believe that as a local business owner that lives and works in the community and employs people in the community, I've got a responsibility to engage and to support the local economy. Other things that I do, I sit on, so I'm the only private business that sits on Litter Free Dorset and Litter Free Coast and Sea working groups, where we've supported various initiatives with them in terms of using drones to identify litter across more the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole area, but we've provided insights from that work that we did to the team here in Dorchester to look at how we can support initiatives to address littering. My team carry out litter picks on Weymouth beachfront every winter. So from September through to April, I pay for my team to go and do that. So when the beach team don't have the mechanical litter collectors, I send a team out, and we've done that as a community initiative with members of the public coming along to collect litter. And I'm currently sponsoring the Dorset Council's domestic refuse collection vehicle in partnership with the council and Litter Free Dorset to support a campaign that McDonald's nationally is supporting. There's lots of other things I can talk to you about my involvement and engagement in the local community. But suffice to say, I'm very involved in the business. Not only is it my personal money that I invest in this restaurant to open it, they're my employees. And so each agreement for a restaurant is a minimum of a 20-year term. So, I'm seeded in the community, hopefully for the rest of my working life.
Could I ask specifically about the restaurant and specifically about the new restaurant? What policies and procedures will you have in place to deal with litter? Because you've got a restaurant where the food isn't presented on china plates with knives and forks. Everything comes in some form of packaging. What policies and procedures will you have in place to deal with the littering by your customers who, for whatever reason, don't use the bins provided?
Yeah, so within the restaurant, we have recycling facilities. So we separate the products into plastics, cardboard, cups, and then send them back through our delivery vehicles. It's collected and through general waste and recyclable collection materials. In terms of dealing with litter or potential for litter, clearly there's external bins around in the vicinity of the restaurant, which are my bins, McDonald's bins, encouraging people to use them. We conduct regular litter picks at all of my sites, so we do that on a minimum of 4 times a day, but actually on a needs basis. So clearly my team will empty the bins and ensure that they're not overflowing. But also what we do is we conduct litter picks in the adjacent area where we collect all kinds of litter, irrespective of the source of that litter. And that's standard practice across all of my restaurants.
So these are these known as litter patrols?
Yes.
Is that the terminology? And just to be clear about this isn't, although this is your responsibility as a franchisee, this is something that happens across the McDonald's estate. It's a term of your franchise agreement that you're to run a minimum number of litter patrols. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's standard practice across all restaurants in the UK and Ireland.
And how is the geographical ambit of the patrol determined? How far do you go, and how do you choose where to go?
So the direction, if you like, is a minimum of 150 metres vicinity to the restaurant, and that's a minimum. what we will do is we will identify, I guess, litter hotspots and look to address and collect litter from those areas. Clearly, from a health and safety and well-being perspective, in terms of my employees, they're given the appropriate equipment, they have high visibility jackets, and we clearly are very conscious of their safety. So not sending them out necessarily, in the depths of night, but what we do have is a staff safe security system, which is a pendant, if you like, around their neck so that they can buzz that and it automatically goes through to a professional body which has direct access to the police and access to the CCTV as well.
And just to be clear, do the litter patrols pick up McDonald's litter only, or is it any form of litter they see?
Absolutely any form of litter.
Is McDonald's running any campaigns to try and educate or persuade customers to dispose of packaging responsibly? Is there anything you can tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the responsibilities that I have as a McDonald's franchisee, I sit on what we call a brand trust committee, and we've identified as franchisees that we wanted a more active voice around anti-littering. As a result of that, we used my Jubilee Retail Park restaurant as a venue for filming for a national advertising campaign, using some, I'll use the word celebrities, to identify inappropriate customer behaviour, where we didn't give them packaging, they got the food in their hands, and the ethos of that was, well, if we can't trust you to dispose of the litter appropriately, we're not going to give you packaging. So that was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek campaign. But as I made reference in my opening, one of the current initiatives that I have localised and invested in myself is we are currently running a national campaign called Litter Lotto. Simplistically, that's encouraging and gamifying disposing of litter appropriately. So someone takes a picture of themselves putting their litter in an appropriate bin, they scan a QR code and send that in, and they can win prizes. Money can't buy experiences and prizes. So McDonald's is the sole supporter of that campaign, but I've worked with Litter Free Dorset Council to, as I made reference, to invest in co-branding of the domestic refuse collection vehicle that facilitates refuse collection across Weymouth, and also branding 350 bins across Weymouth and Portland to activate that campaign and encourage the right behaviours when it comes to disposing of litter.
I'd like to turn to the topic of antisocial behaviour, and in particular, so-called boy racers, people taking high-performance cars out in the evening and making a nuisance of themselves, revving engines, racing, and all the rest of it. You already operate a 24-hour drive-through McDonald's restaurant in Weymouth. What is your experience? Well, firstly, how far away is that from the application site?
It's just under a mile away.
So quite close. What's your experience of so-called boy racers in running that restaurant just about a mile away?
So I think the first thing I would highlight is that my other restaurant at Jubilee Retail Park is on a retail development. Part of that retail development is cordoned off at night time with gates. So there's access to a smaller car park and, of course, the drive-through facility around the restaurant. We don't have an issue with boy racers, to use that phrase, in the restaurant or around in the vicinity of the restaurant. I'm aware that some people park up in vehicles in the long stay car park opposite, and some will choose to not dispose of their litter correctly. We collect that litter. So I work very closely with the RSPB there. So in short, we don't have any definable challenge with, to use the phrase again, boy races.
And in relation to the application site, is your understanding a similar arrangement is going to work in terms of the car park, that the 24-hour car parks will be yours and Costa Coffee's, and the rest does not operate on a 24-hour basis?
Yes. So the site developer will have a barrier to the main larger car park adjacent to the big box retail units. Clearly, through my car, so the restaurant not only being well lit, will also have CCTV, so HD quality CCTV in operation, both within the restaurant, but also in the vicinity to the drive-through lane as well. So that will film vehicles, that would come into the drive-through.
Thank you. Well, I think that's all I want to elicit from Mr. Truscott in terms of evidence in chief, as we would call it if we were in a court. There's just one or two further matters I'd like to highlight in the documentation that we provided, and then we'll take questions. I'm afraid I'm going to use the P word again and talk about planning. I do hope that you'll agree with me that the passages I'm about to show you are relevant to licensing as well. But in my pack of extra documents, I've put in the officer's report for the planning application. And I haven't put the whole thing in because it was 45 pages long, but I've put in the heading and then the passage dealing with residential amenity. And I'd just like to draw your attention to, this is page 20 in the additional pack, just on the, firstly, dealing with the issue of noise. The relevant paragraphs I'd like to take you to, firstly, paragraph 15.19 at page 20. Third-party concerns have been raised regarding the impact of noise from the proposed development on the adjacent neighbouring properties. A noise assessment was submitted as part of the application, and I'll take you to that in a minute, Chair. Environmental health were consulted on the application and considered noise which has been separated into the following: plant noise, car parking noise, delivery noise, drive-through noise. In relation to plant noise, environmental health agreed that if the development was approved, there should be a condition about plant noise, and that happened, and I'll take you to that condition at a minute. In relation to car parking noise, environmental health raised no concerns as the car parking would be located some distance away from the residential properties and would be on the other side of the built form of the large retail units. In terms of noise from the proposed drive-through, these units are located towards the northern boundary, away from residential properties, and is therefore not considered to raise a concern, and environmental health raised no comments on this. Given the above, the opening trading hours of the units would not be restricted by way of a condition. So the planning conditions, which we'll come on to in a minute, restrict hours for some things, but they don't restrict hours on the trading and servicing of Unit 8, the McDonald's unit. At paragraph 15.22 on page 21, the boy racer issue was raised in planning. Third-party concerns have also been raised regarding the car park being used for antisocial behaviour at night, in particular in relation to cars. It's the intention of the developer that the larger car park, which would serve the terrace of retail units, so it's units 2, 3 and 4 that we've already seen on the plan, would be closed off at night using a barrier at the entrances. This would retain access to the smaller units and the drive-through. And finally, 15.24 on page 22, given all of the above, it's considered that the proposed development would not have a significant adverse impact on the living conditions of occupiers and residential properties. Obviously, you look at a different question, which is whether it would be appropriate to grant the licence to promote the licensing objectives, having regard to the underlying purposes of licensing set out in the Section 182 guidance. But I'm going to suggest that these factors are relevant to your determination. The acoustic report referred to is at page 23 of my little bundle, and again I've taken the liberty of rather brutally pruning it, because otherwise you'd have 100 pages of acoustic report. But essentially, the key passages are at page 27, 6.9, noise levels predicted to arise from drive-through activity at the proposed drive-through units fall well within the World Health Organization values for daytime and nighttime noise, are well below the existing noise climate. With regard to predicted drive-through activity noise levels, it's concluded both units could constrain on an unrestricted basis, i.e. 24 hours a day, without associated noise giving rise to significant adverse impact, which is the test under the National Planning Policy Framework. And the conclusions at the next page, page 28, paragraph 7.2, it's concluded that the proposed retail units could proceed without the likelihood of noise from subsequent operations giving rise to significant adverse impact on the basis of the following operating hours. And what the expert recommended, and obviously this is the developer's expert, but nonetheless an expert with an obligation to give an independent assessment, says unrestricted hours for trading and restrict the servicing hours for the big units along the bottom, but unrestricted hours for everything else. The decision notice itself is at page 2, and the conditions are numerous, but the ones I would briefly highlight to you start at condition 7, which is page 5. Condition 7, that limits unit 7, which is the Costa Coffee unit, only for the purposes of a drive-through coffee shop, no restricted hours on that. Condition 8 restricts my client's unit for class A3, that's restaurant, and A5, that's takeaway. Again, no hours. Condition 10 puts a time limit on deliveries to 2 of the big barns, and condition 11, another delivery time limit for another of the big barns. The point I would make is those time limits don't apply to my client's premises, and the reason I would suggest is because it's that much further away and has the benefit of the buffer that the big boxes provide. Condition 12 does affect my client's premises. That's a condition in relation to plant noise, that plant noise has to have a noise assessment submitted in relation to it. Condition 13, this is the planning authority grappling with the service yard to the rear of the large.
To assess it. What about in the summer holidays when it's when you're potentially going to be fairly busy, I would assume?
When I made reference to 4 times a day, that's the minimum frequency. Clearly, on a needs basis, we adjust that in terms of emptying the bins within the demise of the property, but also conducting litter picks in the area as well. So yeah, 4 times a day is the minimum.
And around management for the establishment, will you have a manager on the whole time that the premises is open? And will that be a manager? Is that going to be an assistant manager or a supervisor?
Yeah, so there's a business manager in each restaurant, and then in this restaurant, so that's a business manager that has worked for me previously at Dorchester and then more recently in the town centre restaurant. So so they will be responsible for managing the business. They have a team, 2 assistant managers, and then a number of shift managers that work for them. So in terms of the overall management contingent for the restaurant, I think it's something like about 10 or 11 managers. And you can imagine, obviously, 24 hours a day, I'm not able to ask the same manager to manage the whole time. But ultimately, they are responsible for the day-to-day operation. I'm in the restaurants on a regular basis, but irregular hours. So I cover all day parts in my restaurants. So I visit my restaurants overnight. I work in them overnight. So, you know, I have a responsibility, as I say, to ensure that my team their well-being's looked after and that we are servicing our customers in an appropriate manner at all day parts.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions?
Yes, please, Chair. Your commitment to local community is well put, and I congratulate you on that, and the local environmental matters. That's really, I really appreciate what you're on. We heard that the car park in the evening becomes a little smaller. Who actually controls the closure of the barriers for that? I've got a couple of questions. That would be the first, if I may.
Yeah, so in terms of the closure of the car park, that is dealt with the facilities management company that the retail developer will appoint. Certainly because that's out with the demise of my property.
The other one, if I may, obviously you've got really good control over what's going on and such. Like if there were incidents that you weren't comfortable with or a bit uneasy with within the car park and such, like your team would be bold enough and strong enough to go out and sort that, do you feel?
So all my team are, and certainly the management team, are dealt with in terms of customer conflict resolution, for want of a better description. So they're all trained in that. I made reference to the CCTV and to a facility that we call Staff Safe. Effectively, that is an emergency button in the restaurant, as well as on pendants for any staff that want them. That has a direct access where it goes through to a 24-hour-a-day manned call centre. This is common practice in all of my restaurants and indeed across most of the McDonald's estate nationally. They then have direct access to the CCTV and to the police as well. So, you know, again, as an employer, my duty of care to my team is to make sure they're safe. So I provide the appropriate facilities to support that.
Thank you. And my last question, if I may. You obviously have a real dedication and commitment to clearing litter, but as you and I probably know, when people get in their cars and drive away, generally a lot of litter occurs. I think it's proven that about 20 minutes away. Now, you do the beaches, you do your stuff, and you make your bit. And you've done the education, and I appreciate that. Is there any way that you within reasonable practice, if you like, that we can educate people to stop throwing the litter out 20 minutes? Well, I suppose you really can't, but that's an issue which is going to occur, isn't it, I would imagine?
The potential for that, of course, absolutely, you know, may well occur. I guess what I have personally done, so, and then I'll talk about what McDonald's has done. So that's really what sparked my involvement with Litter Free Dorset and Litter Free Coast and Sea, is to ensure that we are being a responsible neighbour. I'm not able to control the behaviours of the general public. We have appropriate, I guess, for want of a better description, anti-littering messaging in our restaurants and on our packaging. But what we conducted some research as a business, and this is where the gamifying the the role of actually disposing of your litter appropriately and encouraging people to adopt the right behaviours rather than instructing them what not to do actually delivers a more positive outcome. That being said, I've supported things with Litter Free Dorset, Leave Only Footprints campaign, bin your butt cigarette, and the litter mapping that I talked about, where we've assisted BCP Council around bin placement and frequency of bin emptying, and certainly Sophie at Litter Free Dorset and I have spoken, and we've talked about bin placement on some of the public highways. I'm not an expert in litter, but of course, it's something personally I actually feel quite passionate about.
Yeah, there may be a concern, I think, at that hour of the night about noise, etc. Do I gather that the unit is buffered by other units, and are we relying on that to, to mitigate any noise, or is there anything to go in the car park, which might say, some car parks say, when you leave, please, respect our neighbours. Is there anything of that nature?
The applicant's primary case is that the evidence as to noise is all points in the direction of noise from these premises not being audible at the nearest residential. So there's no objection from Environmental Health, who are your noise experts, and then in the crossover with the planning, there was positive evidence put forward in that by a noise consultant that it wouldn't cause an issue, and Environmental Health didn't disagree with that or agreed with that. And that appears to be a combination of the geographical distance between the premises and residential user, and effectively the buffering effect of these this terrace of three large big boxes. So the evidence before the committee I will be submitting is that noise, there is no evidence that noise will be an issue. That being said, it is within the responsibility of the operator that if there is a risk of unacceptable noise coming from the premises or the car park, the operator's got to do something to take reasonable steps to do something about that. So far as the premises itself is concerned, we need to comply with the planning condition on plant noise, and we have self-closing doors. It's a very, well, obviously it's going to be an extremely modern building as the latest that McDonald's can produce, so it will doubtless have electric doors that close itself. So far as the car park noise, and obviously we're dealing here relevantly with noise between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m., signage is a possibility of being placed there. To what extent people are going to read signs at 11 o'clock at night or midnight and say, oh gosh, there's a sign, I better modify my behaviour, I don't know. But there's also a management intervention is possible along the lines Chris has explained. Chris, I mean, you are one of Weymouth's largest employers. There are obviously it's not entirely straightforward in terms of the duty of care to employers, the duty of care and the responsibilities you owe to the community, and there's a balance to be struck. But just talk us through how it would work if somebody was in. Have you ever had experience of at the Jubilee site having to deal with noisy people in the car park? Does it arise in practice? Has it arisen in practice?
Yeah, short answer to that is no. it hasn't. I think the only other thing I would add is within the restaurant, the music at night time clearly is an appropriate level, but it's classical music that we play. So, and there's a reason for that, because it's a slightly calmer, more mellow environment that we try to create. So actually, within all reasonable, practicable steps, we take the appropriate steps to mitigate and reduce and discourage any perceived antisocial behaviour.
I mean, if you had a situation where the base bin addicts of Dorset were to converge upon your premises at midnight and start booming out that sort of music, how would that be dealt with?
If the manager felt comfortable, they would approach the individuals and ask them, if they would be willing to turn the volume down and consider the environment they're in. But very simply, we would contact the police. I've got a good relationship with the police. They come into my restaurants and use our restaurant's CCTV to, if they've had someone committing card fraud or theft across the town, actually, if they quite often will use my restaurants because they know we can provide images of individuals.
No, I'm pleased to hear about the classical music.
Just do one more if I can. You say obviously the duty of care and your duty of responsibility too and such like. I consider myself a bit of an expert in this one, so you'll forgive me. But it's not just now these days the booming music, but also it's the people that put things in their exhaust to make the bangs and all that sort of nonsense that's going on that really causes my wife and I a great deal of angst. But one could say, and I'm just dotting the I's and crossing the T's to make sure we've answered the right questions. I'm not being a swine. But some might say that if the premises weren't there, those people wouldn't be driving to it at those hours early in the morning. Yes, we would answer, well, they haven't been going to the one a mile down the road, but it's something which occurs, and some people might say, well, look, people are going to the premises, making this noise, and if it wasn't there, they wouldn't be doing it. It's something that people might ask and might say, and it's a thing I suppose I should ask you, really.
Well, it's it's the core question of licensing, isn't it? That at the end of the day, it's a balancing exercise, because we could close all the pubs and all stay at home, and indeed we had a little run of that extraordinarily a couple of years ago, and there was less noise, less crime, but I think everybody would agree it was, unsustainable in the long run for the social society in which we live. It is the decision for you, as I'm sure you're aware, is that there's no right or wrong answer in this case, in this application, in any application. It's a question of what is reasonably acceptable in the locality, bearing in mind that people do gain a benefit from participating in licensable activities. There will be people in the emergency services, or people on shift work, or all sorts of people who have a need to buy refreshment late at night and in the early hours and in the morning. And there is the interests of Mr. Truscott in making money, and the interests of his employees in earning a wage, and the interests of the residents and the fears they express. And all of these things are properly engaged in the determination you've got to make. The answer is, yes, if we shut every 24-hour restaurant in Dorset, then the people with the vehicles you suggest may choose to go to another county. The question is that an appropriate response to the problem that you perceive? And you won't be surprised to hear me submit that no, that would be disproportionate. That would be the tail wagging the dog. And there are other ways of dealing with that sort of nuisance. If the evidence is that it's a real problem. I mean, the point is that there is actually no police objection here, and no significant evidence. I mean, obviously, I don't want to preempt anything Mr. Matthews or Councillor Gray has to say. They may vehemently disagree with me about this, but I haven't yet seen any objective evidence, really, of a significant problem in the neighbourhood. But the answer is yes, if we shut Weymouth down, that there may be less alcohol-related crime, there may be less crime-related or antisocial behaviour related to late-night refreshment. But that is one option in the balancing exercise. But obviously, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I would suggest a disproportionate reaction.
The question that people might raise, and I do understand that ambulance drivers and the lifeboat people need to have something to eat after a bad night and such like, so I totally understand that as well. Thank you.
Councillors, do you have any further questions for the applicant? No? Okay. I will go to our licensing officers. Do you have any questions for the applicant?
Yeah, no questions to ask, Chair.
Thank you. I'll now move on to the people that have made representation. This is your chance to ask the applicant if you have any questions. I will come to you for you to outline your report that you've done and for anything that you want to add to it. But at this stage, it's just any questions that you have for the applicant. Did you want to go first, Mr. Matthews?
Just one question. How many employees do you expect to have between 11 at night and 5 in the morning?
So there'll be a core team, a minimum manning a restaurant of approximately 4 to 5 employees. Beyond that, we would scale it depending on the level of business, but that would be the minimum that I would expect to see in the restaurant.
Thank you very much.
No questions from me.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I will now move on to those that have made representation. Mr. Matthews, did you want to go first? Obviously, we've read your report. Is there anything that you would like to add to it? Anything you'd like to highlight to us?
Thank you, Chair. Basically, I want to set the scene at the present. McDonald's, and I support all businesses, etc. It's in the middle of this retail park, a new one, which is not open yet. It is the lowest point of this retail park. It's in like a bowl, if you like. So any noise from that area will rise. Personally, I'm not too concerned with the premises itself. The noise, it will be contained. I know it will be well managed. But one thing you haven't got control over is the access roads to the McDonald's, which is quite a slope, coming down from Dorchester Road, down Mercery Road, and again up the other side, past Premier Inn Hotel, and out towards Sainsbury's. There's quite a slope. So that sets the scene. And during the day and in the evenings, we're going to lose our peace and quiet. These retail box units will be open until 8, 9 o'clock in the evening. And noise tends to get part of the daily business. But at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, you walk out into my back garden, you can hear a pin drop. It is so silent. It is really, really peaceful. Now, one thing I missed, and my neighbours have also missed, is fast food establishments tend to employ or end up engaging motorcycle couriers who will come and collect orders, and that will get more and more. I've examined over the last month McDonald's premises. They have lots of motorcycles parked up at McDonald's ready for the order to come in by phone so they can whiz out to the customers to deliver the burgers and such like. They're small motorcycles, usually run at full revs to get to where they're going quite quickly, and they have to accelerate up that hill every time to get an order. And that's going to be like an angry bee all night long for these motorcycles. And in the summer, it's not unusual to sleep with your windows open. I'm sure most people have the same in Dorset. And just going to get disturbed on a regular basis by these motorcycle couriers and the boy racers and such like. But mainly, general traffic who are not even breaking the law will be trying to get away from that establishment quite rapidly up that hill and revving up to get onto Dorchester Road, having to stop sometimes for other traffic to accelerate away again. So Heatherley Road, St Andrew's Close, Dorchester Road are going to get disturbed, not just myself. That's my main points. And As again, I do support business and I wish you all the best, but your Jubilee sign is in a better place for 24-hour opening than the new retail thing. So I would say it's the right place and right time for such businesses, and I don't think this is the right place for that time of night. Certainly up to 11 o'clock, we accept it's going to happen. But 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, there's an awful lot of people of all ages in the area, and they're all going to get disturbed at some point or another. Basically, I support all the objections that's gone in from my neighbours and community because they've all gone on the same thing. It's all about noise and disruption of the area. It does sound like I'm a NIMBY, but it really is a concern for why. That's the only premises going to be open during the night. There's no other retail box, and they've all got restrictions, as has been pointed out, about noise of deliveries not to happen between certain hours. And it doesn't cover McDonald's, but I don't think it was really thought about at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe up to 11 o'clock, but 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning? I do ask that McDonald's withdraw their application rather than get refused, because it's not good business sense. And I ask that the licence not be allowed for that time of night. Thank you.
Thank you. Just so you know, I did a site visit. I do a site visit on every application that I sit on, because I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know somewhere where somewhere is and it's not. So yeah, I've attended the site, so I'm fully aware of where it is and the location that it's into other premises as well. Feel your pain with traffic, really do. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can consider as a licensing committee, but I do take that on board, and and yeah, do feel your pain on that one. Councillors, do you have any questions?
Do you? My experience is that quite often you've made the point about the delivery bikes and such like, and the mopeds can be a nuisance, and I understand. I think quite a few people now do it on bikes because they get the electric bikes in the towns, don't they? My experience is that quite often when these premises are shut, the noise which emanates from the people who are disappointed and the driving and the raucous noise is as bad, if not worse, or in fact worse than when the premises were open, because you get angry young people who really then misbehave. I don't know if you might have experienced that personally. It's a thought I have that once they go and expect somewhere to be open and it's shut, the noise can be quite unpleasant. Just I don't know if you've ever thought about that one.
Yes, we do during the summer at present have noise from the park and ride. The boy races go around there, and there's evidence there of all the tyre marks and the circles and such like, even at Sainsbury's roundabout, as part of Mersey Road. So there is a problem with boy races already, and I do believe this is just be a magnet for more. And I share your views as well, but some of them won't even be breaking the law, it's just trying to get up that hill if they're like Deliveroo, who provide the access and delivery for collection for the food orders throughout the night. They're not even trying to break the law, they're just going about their daily business. But if McDonald's wasn't open, then that problem wouldn't exist, as you mentioned earlier. You're quite right. Thank you.
I'm just going to ask for clarification on one point that you made, obviously about the deliveries. With the bikes in that, so I will go to our applicants. Are you able to elaborate on that any more, please?
Sorry, what specifically would you like me to elaborate on?
Will you be doing like Uber Eats and so forth? So say, are you going to be restricting those hours that anybody can have a takeaway by? I'm using Uber Eats for a. I'm just picking one because there's lots. Yeah, are you going to limit your hours to when deliveries will be made? Obviously, Mr. Matthews just stated on the fact that you could have potentially 4 or 5 deliveries go from your premises at 3 o'clock in the morning should the application be granted. So, if you can just put some clarification on that, please.
Yeah. I will currently work with 2 delivery partners, so Uber and Just Eat, Uber Eats and Just Eat. We have a good relationship with the local drivers because they're an extension of my business when they deliver the products to customers. Currently, We only operate from my existing restaurants up until midnight with them. And at this point in time, there's no plans to extend that. I can't, can project what the future will be, but I think it's unlikely that there will be a big demand for deliveries at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. In terms of this restaurant, as part of the design, what I've done is created a separate delivery collection room where delivery drivers will sit away from customers. That means that there is an area within the building, within the domain of the actual building, for the delivery drivers to come inside the restaurant and collect the food that they are taking to deliver to customers. So there'll be less need for them to sit in the cars, potentially with the engines running. So they'll come into the restaurants. But currently, to answer your question, we only offer delivery services up until midnight.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer that question for you?
It certainly helps along the way, but as I say, it's the future is going to be, money is the magnet, so they will expand and the collection will take place. People will drive. Everybody has to get out somehow, no matter what, whether a customer or a courier, they've got to go up that hill to get out to Dorchester Road, and the noise will rise. All the points that the gentleman made about the noise examinations and tests, such like, is from the premises, not necessarily from the Mercy Road going up the hill, and that's where the area is concerned. During the dead of night, I had, that's the biggest problem.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any further questions for Mr Matthews?
No, thank you.
Licensing, do you have any questions for Mr Matthews?
Questions from us?
Thank you. I'll now go to the applicant. Do you have any questions for Mr Matthews? No. Okay, thank you, Mr Matthews. I will give you a chance to sum up at the end if you've got anything else that you would like to add, okay? Okay, I will now move on to Councillor Gray. Councillor Gray, is there anything that you would like to add to your representation? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I've just got 3 points I'd like to make. 2 that I put in my submission, and I come back to the litter issue, which I'll give you the reality rather than the rehearsed answers that were given. I'm glad the solicitor brought up the planning application, although this is a licensing meeting. The planning application deemed it appropriate to put restrictions on deliveries of the big box retailers, I think till 11 o'clock. And they did that for a reason. Whilst the delivery entrance is back onto the residential area, what the buffer, as the solicitor talked about, between those big box retailers and McDonald's is an empty car park, which is in a bowl. So I think the noise travel, if it was 24 hours, would affect those residents. And secondly, we get constant, well, I do as the ward member, constant complaints from residents about noise from the park and ride, which is adjacent to this site, and that is further away from the residents than this site is. So I don't think there's any reason why we wouldn't expect some noise pollution from a 24-hour operation. On the antisocial behaviour issue, I think boy races were mentioned. We've been working on a plan with Dorset Council and Dorset Police for a long time around the park and ride. There's restrictions on additional patrols, and there's also restrictions on access to that, and we are currently in the final stages of making sure that's locked at night because of the boy racer issue. And the residents, and certainly I believe that there'll be some displacement of that. I do hear the applicant's management plan around the site being locked, but if it's not fortified, there will be boy races in there. So, and whilst I'm a supporter of McDonald's in terms of being a customer, it does attract that demographic. So the residents are concerned about that, and it's hard to undo something if you do grant this licence. I didn't put this in my submission, but I'd like to, as the ward member, McDonald's in the Jubilee Way is not in my area, but the RSPB site over the road is. The reality is, despite what the applicant said, the reality is the litter from McDonald's is, I mean, I do litter picks there probably every 3 months with the RSPB. Over 50% of the litter, despite their efforts, is from McDonald's. That's off the top of my head, that's observational. So I think there will be a litter problem despite, and I'm not suggesting that McDonald's can control that, but the reality from residents is that there will be a litter problem. And 24 hours will exacerbate that, I think. I think that's all I want to say in terms of my submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillors, do you have any questions for Councillor Gray?
No.
One thing that I've just wanted to touch on there, when you just mentioned, this is more just a comment, when you mentioned about should the licence be granted, that it's, can be difficult to have, go back on it. Every licence that's granted, if there is evidence there under the licensing objectives of any concerns, a licence can be called back in. So if there was any concerns there around noise, if you went to environmental health with those issues and their environmental health found to be an issue, a licence can be called back to the licensing committee, and the licensing committee can review that licence again, and that's any licence. So if anything comes under the licensing objectives, if this was granted, and anything came under the licensing objectives that you had concerns with around noise, environmental health, you said about the antisocial behaviour, if you feel as though there was antisocial behaviour coming from that premises, then that's something that obviously, I know it's a nightmare because you would have to go to the police about it to get it logged. You might think, police have got better things to do with their time, which I'm sure they have. But all these things here, if there's a picture built up, and I said this is with any premises, if there's an issue with any premises licence, then a licence will get called back into committee and the committee will review the licence. So when you're granted a licence, it's not a done deal. We have powers to bring it back to us and to change what is on that licence. And a lot of people aren't aware of it, so that's why I just say I put it out there in pretty much every hearing I do, because I think it's worth people knowing from both sides. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. My only comment would be that being involved in some enforcement issues in the last 3 years, they are a very long and painful process, and residents probably would lose heart over that, I think. We haven't got a great record, is my view.
With licensing, ours are quite swift. Thank you. But no, thank you for your comments. Do you have anything to add? Thank you for attending this morning, and thank you for your comments. Any?
No, I can only support the chairman in that reviews do happen quite swiftly.
Oh, they do happen.
Yeah.
They do. Licensing officers, do you have any questions for Councillor Gray?
No questions, but obviously to clarify on how quick they are. As soon as we receive the review application, that's it. We will go straight to the premises, put up the signs, and there's a 28-day consultation period. Then the hearing is heard after the 20 working days. But yeah, they're quite quick.
Thank you. I'll go to the applicants. Do you have any questions for Councillor Gray? Okay. I'm now going to move on to summing up, and I do generally sum up backwards. I will start with Councillor Gray. Councillor Gray, is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, Chair, I've said everything. Thank you.
Again, thank you for your time this morning and thank you for attending. Mr. Matthews, is there anything that you would like to add to summing up?
No, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Again, thank you for attending. Appreciate your time. I will now move on to the applicant. Do you have anything to add for summing up, please?
Yes. A few words, Chair. Your task today under Section 18 of the Act is, having regard to the representations you've heard, to say such are the specified steps as you consider appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives. And I'm going to suggest that the appropriate step is to grant the application as asked for. So that's to grant the license for late night refreshment between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. 7 days a week, subject to the conditions set out in the operating schedule. That's at page 39 of your main bundle. And in very brief summary, there's a CCTV condition, a condition to operate the staff safe system, and conditions in relation to health and safety training for staff, no open alcohol containers policy in the in-store area, and to carry out litter patrols and the displays, self-closing doors, and all the matters set out in the operating schedule. And I submit that would be the proportionate decision for you to make, bearing in mind that your decisions have to be on the basis of evidence rather than on the basis of unevidenced fears. And what we have here, as I said in opening, and the evidence has turned out to correspond with that, essentially three issues, headline issues from the representors: noise, antisocial behaviour, and litter. So far as noise is concerned, noise is an expert discipline. Noise is a matter of acoustic expertise, and paragraph 9.12 of the section 182 guidance, I'm sure I'm not the first advocate to have mentioned that in a closing submission to you, reminds you that your main source of expertise is usually in-house. When it comes to noise, it's usually from environmental health, and environmental health have obviously got a duty under the Environmental Protection Act to investigate complaints of statutory nuisance and take appropriate steps, and they've got a duty if they feared that a public nuisance was going to arise from this application to put a representation in, and they have not done so. And this is a case, I would suggest, where there is an overlap between the planning and the licensing issues, and I've already taken you to the planning documentation where you can see that environmental health took the same approach on the basis of a noise assessment by the developer, commissioned by the developer. So far as antisocial behaviour is concerned, the police are the experts in that, and again, the police have not seen fit to put a representation in relation to this application. And you've heard from Mr. Truscott that, in fact, the boy racer issue, if I can call it that, isn't a feature of his existing premises an hour away, a mile away, or slightly under a mile away, and we feel our car park is too small, too covered with CCTV, and too well managed to be an attraction to that sort of element. So far as litter is concerned, I mean, there does come a point in licensing where operators' responsibility stops and the personal responsibility of clientele kicks in. But what actually happens in this particular case is that, as the operating schedule points out, McDonald's go significantly above and beyond what the rest of the sector does in relation to litter. So if I can read out the application, they were the first company in the sector to introduce litter patrols in the early 1980s. McDonald's is committed to carry out litter controls, collecting both McDonald's packaging and any other litter that's been carelessly discarded. Happy to act on recommendations from the EHO. And I asked Mr. Truscott some questions about this. Councillor Gray suggested rehearse those questions. That's not the case. It would be against my code of conduct to rehearse evidence with a witness in proceedings. I'm a barrister, not a solicitor, and we're not allowed to do that. But if there's a suggestion that the evidence of Mr. Truscott is somehow false or tailored, I'm afraid I have to robustly reject that. This is what Mr. Truscott's answers, Mr. Truscott's answers. It's what he does, but it's nothing unusual because one of his obligations as a franchisee is to carry out a minimum of 4 checks per day in a 24-hour restaurant. He complies with his contractual obligations, and you've heard what he's had to say about that. So in relation to the 3 points of objection, there is, I would suggest, no real evidence of any adverse effect on the public nuisance, protection from crime and disorder objectives before you. So far as litter is concerned, all the evidence is that McDonald's go above and beyond what is common in the sector. And I would ask you to grant this application as sought. I remind you that it's a light touch licensing regime. You, Chair, have already made the point about reviews. I mean, not only are reviews, they have to be heard, there's a 28-day consultation period, then they have to be heard within 20 working days. They're also free. It is free for anyone to bring a review. It's a fairly unique legal process in that no fee is payable for anyone to bring a review. To suggest it's a long and painful process is one that I don't think is based in any form of evidence. The contrary is the case. It's hard to think of a simpler and cheaper process in any form of licensing regime than the ability of a resident to bring a review of a premises license. And so for all those reasons, I would ask that you grant this application as sought.
Thank you for your summing up, and thank you for attending today. I'll move on to our licensing officers for summing up, please.
Got nothing further to add, Chair.
Thank you. And again, I just want to thank everybody for their time this morning. I do appreciate your time. In regards to that, I will bring this part of the meeting to a close. We will now go into an exempt session to have our debate. We will have with us our legal advisor for any legal aspects that might need covering. I will just confirm first, Lara, that we have actually covered all legal aspects of the hearing.
Yes, Chair.
So before I propose to go into exempt business, obviously we will go into exempt business, we will make our decision. I can't guarantee you when that decision will be made. Once our decision is made, our licence officer, are you sending it out via email?
Yeah, we will send all the decisions out via email because we've had all the reps via email.
So in the first instance, the licensing officers will email, anybody that's made representation here today will email the decision notice out to you, and that will obviously give you our decision. You will receive a paper copy of our decision, and once you've received that paper copy of our decision, if you're not happy with the decision that we've made, then you do have a right to appeal, and that is within 21 days to Weymouth Magistrates Court, but that is on receipt of the written representation, not the email.
We won't send it, because we're sending it out in an email format, it won't be sent as a paper version. No, It'll just be straight up email the decision. Anyone who's written a representation that has an email will receive a paper one, but those, because everything's been contacted via email, the decision will just be via email. So it'll be from the date of when they received that email.
So you won't get a paper copy. So if you're not happy with the decision, that's a new one on me, if you're not happy with the decision, once you've received your email, then obviously you do have a right within 21 days to appeal to Weymouth Magistrates Court. And I will say, unlike the review, which the review doesn't have a cost to it, obviously there is a cost to any appeal that is undertaken. Is everybody happy they've had their say? I don't want anybody to go away thinking they haven't had a fair hearing, because that's not what it's about. I want to make sure that everybody's had a fair hearing. Okay. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And I will now just take a vote to go into exempt business, please.
No, so proposed, Chairman.
Thank you.
Second, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.